Hello, let's look at limitation of study. Every research work has a limitation of study. No study is completely flawless. No study includes all possible aspects that will make it strong or complete. Something could be missing or may have been left out in the process of carrying out the study. Those things constitute the limitation of study. So when you provide the limitation of study in your research work, it means you are being sincere. You are being realistic. So what is limitation of study? Limitation of study refers to the methodological flaws in any research work that affect the way the result would be generalized or interpreted. The limitation of study is a problem related to the methodology used in a work that affects the way the findings will be interpreted or generalized. Limitation of study affects the generalizability of the result. So what does that grammar generalizability mean? Generalizability refers to the extension of findings and conclusion of your study on a sample population to the larger population. It means relating the observations you made from a study on a small group, that's the sample size, to a larger group, that's the population. So generalization means to extrapolate the results of a study to a larger population outside the one studied in the work you're looking at. We have said the limitation of study refers to constraints that relate to the methodology of the work. What is methodology? This refers to the guideline for arriving at the results of the research problem, a systematic way of arriving at study results, the procedure for executing the work, the step-by-step approach to the study. That is methodology. It includes the population of study, sample size, sampling technique, the method of study, the instrument that will be used, the data gathering strategy, and all that. They make up the methodology of study. So, limitation of study in research has to do with the weaknesses, the defects in terms of the methodology adopted for the study. It refers to the constraints that affect the researcher's ability to effectively carry out the study. You could call it a restriction or a defect in the methodology of study. You could describe limitation as what stops your work from being generalized. So the limitation of study in simple terms refers to weaknesses in methodology. Weaknesses related to decisions made in the study, especially in the area of methodology, the unanswered methodological questions. The limitation of study could be in terms of the sample size you selected, the sampling technique you selected, the area of study you restricted your work to, the data gathering instrument you used, or the data gathering technique adopted for the study. For instance, it is possible that you studied a smaller sample size, but you think that a larger sample size could have been better for your work. That you could describe that as a limitation of your work. It could be that the sampling technique you adopted, maybe you used purposive sampling technique, but you think that systematic sampling technique would have been better, or that another study should try the systematic sampling technique, or you think that the systematic sampling technique should be used in a similar study to know whether there will be difference in the findings. Maybe it is the area of study. You think probably you restricted your work to just a small community, but you think that studying an entire state would have been stronger. It is possible you used only survey research, for instance, when you think combining survey and content analysis would make the work stronger and the results more generalizable. It is possible you studied only one community in a survey research, or you studied one geopolitical zone of Nigeria, for instance, which means the results may not be generalized to reflect what happens in other geopolitical zones of the country. That is a limitation caused by the area of study you selected. Some persons include time and money as limitation of study, but we said that limitation of study has to do with flaws or weaknesses in the methodology. So, time and money can only come in if you explain them well. You have to give the reason well. For instance, somebody could claim that due to lack of resources, he or she could not expand the study beyond a small community or beyond a state. That is the reason you give when you mention time. But the fact is, the limitation you should mention is the fact that you studied a community, that is in terms of area of study. So it is time that cost, it is time or money that cost it, but you should state area of study or you state sample size, not giving us the reason why it was only one community. So in most cases, examiners do not accept time and money as limitation of study. They want you to mention the exact aspect of your methodology that you think is weak. Time is not a methodology. Money is not a methodology. But time could affect the area of study or the scope of the work. Money could affect the number of elements you are able to study. But the fact is that you are expected to state the aspect of methodology, aspect of the work in terms of methodology, in terms of procedure that you think is weak, that you think is defective, and could affect the way the findings of the work will be interpreted. So, limitation of study talks about methodological flaws. We keep mentioning methodological flaws so that the emphasis will be clear to you. Now, let's give you an example of what could be your limitation of study. For example, a researcher could have this limitation. One major limitation of my work is that I used only the structured questionnaire interview technique in gathering data for my study. But probably a mixed method approach to include the focus group interview technique would have made the findings stronger. So, the fact that you used only the structured questionnaire interview technique could be a methodological flaw or weakness that you think could influence interpretation of the results. The next question you often get when defending your work is, since you observe these limitations, why didn't you add them to make your work stronger? When you're asked such question, why is it that you noticed those limitations and you didn't go ahead to include them? You just give the response that you recommended those aspects of the methodology you left out as suggestions for further study. You are recommending that other researchers can apply them or can use them in their own study to see whether they could get a different result. There is no way you can have a complete work, and there is no examiner that expects that you won't have limitation of study. So while doing your work, because you want to be focused, you cannot include every aspect of the study, every aspect of the methodology. You only select the ones that you think will make your work focused, and that is why you find some persons using only survey method. Some others could use only content analysis. Some others could use a mixed method combining both the survey method and the content analysis method. Some others could even just use focus group discussion. But the fact is, in that same study they chose only one method. It is possible that combining two methods could make it stronger, could give a different result, or could make for better possibility of generalizing the findings. And that is why you should be able to point out the limitations of study in your work. Remember, limitations of study talk about flaws in terms of methodology. Some persons also mention limited access to data or lack of previous research studies on the topic they are working on as limitation. Now you have to explain this too. Such limitations could prevent the researcher from understanding the environment of study. That is, what has been done previously in this area, what improvements should be added to the new study, what methodological adjustments should be explored to make the work stronger. So if there are few studies in the area you're studying, it could pose a limitation too, because you won't have the latitude of studies to guide your own. You won't see several studies and several methods applied, several findings in those works to guide your own study. So that could be a limitation too. Just note that limitation of study has to do with the methodology, the flaws in the methodology, the weaknesses in the methodology. Point them out. Is it in terms of sample size? If it is sample size, you could suggest that a larger sample size would have been better. If it is in terms of method of study you adopted, maybe you used survey method and you think that combining both survey and content analysis would have been better. Maybe you used only focus group discussion as your method of study, but you think that survey would have been brought in, or that the in-depth interview technique would have been combined with the focus group discussion method. You mention it. maybe it's in terms of the sampling technique you adopted. Probably you use the purposive sampling technique, but you think that systematic sampling technique could even be better for the study. You have to look for aspects of the methodology that you think constitute weak link to the study, and then point them out as limitations of your research work.